question is, if a group of genuine liberals comes forward and says that we will transform Indian polity, we'll offer a clean alternative to the people, and we want to incorporate certain essential elements of transformation of India in our manifesto, what is the most important radical transformative agenda?
A liberal manifesto should first and foremost promise that it will get the word socialism removed from the preamble to the constitution. Second, it should speak up for the farmers and should promise that it will get rid of the Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee Act and the Essential Commodities Act, both of which are stifling the farmers.
बीज से बाजार तक every aspect of Indian agriculture is regulated, restricted or prohibited. So a liberal manifesto must call for a complete freedom of farmers to decide on how to use their land, what kind of seed, what kind of technology, what kind of farming practices, to whom to trade within and outside India without restriction, prohibition and control.
My big liberal idea is stronger consumer protection rights, because I feel in our country the consumer is treated both by government and by private players. If liberalism is the idea that if I pay for services, I should get that service, then that's not what happens in India. And I really want a situation where the consumer should be able to go to court not only against private players but also against government services. It has started, for instance, with one train paying a compensation to its passengers for arriving late. Now this should stretch to many other government services. I should be able to sue for services not delivered to me, including potholed roads, including terrible traffic, including air pollution. I should be, as a citizen, I should have the right to sue for extreme damage to my health because of air pollution. So that's the radical idea I would like to be established in order for me as a liberal citizen to get my rights.
One, and I think that possibly would be difficult, but it would be the one that would really count the most, would be to actually have an absolute freedom of press clause in the Constitution rather than the present one, which is highly conditional. That's very difficult, changing the Constitution. But a secondary proposal would be to revisit the 1947 Press Laws Inquiry Commission, which is the basis of the definition of reasonable restriction today. Revisit that and massively reduce the number of restrictions and conditions on which the press function to this day, and have that embodied in the law of the country.
The radical reform idea that I would like to see is something that ensures that electoral reforms take place right away. Most of the trouble that we see around us is because of the manner in which we hold our elections. If there is a party that has access to money, that has access to those who own money, then that party has a greater chance to succeed. What we have to do is divorce our elections from funding. We either ensure that parties are funded by the state or that parties are funded by the voter. That each voter has a 200 rupee voucher. That voter gives that 200 rupee voucher to the party that she wants to vote for or she likes. So the voter is actually voting twice for the same party. She is going and saying, here is my 200 rupees for you, and go and campaign, and then when the elections happen, she is voting for that same party again, or she might change her mind during the election. But what happens therefore is that elections are fought on a clear, clean field that is a level field for everybody. And till we have this complicated system of every political party trying to influence the voter with huge amounts of money, of using very shady means of raising money like electoral bonds, and ensuring that India's election becomes even more expensive than the US election, we will have smaller parties suffer. We will have people who want to get into politics with very little money stay away because they can never think of matching a big machinery that requires millions of dollars. So the reform idea that I am proposing is a simple idea. Scrap electoral funding the way it is run now, ensure that either the state pays for it or that individuals pay for it, and that there is a very strict monitoring against those who overspend. If people are flying around in helicopters, in seaplanes, giving away tons of money to various people, that party must be stopped from fighting elections. We must move to a situation where each party has a structure in place, is audited very regularly, all its funding and its income and its expenditure is accounted to the last penny, and the election that happens in a level playing field.
The federal government should be restricted completely to managing the affairs of defense and managing the affairs of foreign affairs. All other functions, from health to education to economic well-being, must be entrusted to the states. So the federal dream is a liberal dream, and I believe that by completely abolishing ministries and only having defense and foreign affairs at the central level would be my radical political manifesto. I also believe the post of governors should be abolished. All governors in all states should be abolished. These are nothing but retirement homes. They are political appointees, massive waste of taxpayers' money. They live in these huge homes, these Raj Bhavans and the pomp and splendor. They do not function as checks on executive power. They are in fact arms of executive power. They are in fact political apparatchiks who are given a retirement home. All governors should be abolished. All ministries should be abolished. All states should have complete control over health, education and well-being. The center should only control defense and foreign affairs.
The single biggest cause of economic sclerosis, even economic paralysis in India, I believe, is the way we record and deal with land. If we can move to a robust, digitized, and one which actually measures physical land with proper demarcations, as a survey across the country with ownership done by clear adverse possession and record keeping methods, even using blockchain. Blockchain is a beautiful technology to get our land records okay. The number of litigations will drop, the number of paralyzed situations where this useful asset of the country, you just drive around the country, there are so many pieces of land which are completely unutilized, which are locked in litigation, which are locked in stupefying kind of endless delays, and produce acrimony, actually morally corrode the country because brothers constantly fighting brother for land. If we can do a better job on land records and land titling, including title insurance, including using adverse possession, including using Google technology. When Google is able to tell us everything about our land, why can't our government, why can't our tehsildar have the same tools that Google has? And then we use blockchain. And we can make at one stroke, we can make this country 5, 10, 15, 20% more efficient than it is. And so many of our problems of saying there's shortage of land to start a factory or do this will just go away. There's plenty of land. It's just it's locked up and it simply doesn't move. So if we get the land markets some fluidity, if we can get them going, I think we will be on to a big thing.
I think one idea which Indian liberals have to build any manifesto around is the fact that India's future is urban. This is where jobs are created, this is where people escape to get away from the caste system, this is where opportunities are there. However, Indian cities are badly managed, badly funded, very poor living conditions. So the one big idea, I think, is to politically empower Indian cities with elected mayors, and secondly to economically empower them by giving a direct slice of the GST collections to cities. So rather than sharing it with the states and hoping states will pass it on to cities, just like the GST is now shared between states and the union, It should be union, states and cities.
It's a funny one, for a person who believes in the free market. I'm going to tell you something which seems to be counterintuitive, but it will soon make sense. I want sport to come into the concurrent list away from the state list. So you'll ask, why is it that a concurrent list will be better? Well, I'll tell you what it is. The problem today here is that state federations all have different constitutions and different ways of electing their people. And then you have somebody at the center who's being elected. Now you have a sports code which is trying to be put into place, but it's only for people at the center. What is not happening is that the constitution of the state levels, and that is not changing. Now what happens if the constitutions of the state level don't change? No real reform can happen in the center, because the products of that state level are what are coming to the center. So my point to you is, the biggest problem with Indian sport is ambiguity. What happens? Moment I create ambiguity, I create power. Because when I have a statement that can be interpreted in 3 different ways, I am allowing the person sitting in the chair to decide how to interpret them for his vote, his financial gain, or for any other motive. If we put sport on the concurrent list and we have a uniform sports code that is extremely strong and with as little ambiguity as possible, we have a situation where we might be able to make the people who run our sports accountable and create a system where they have to operate completely within the rules offered to them. In other words, create what we call a fair constitution for Indian sport as a blueprint around all states.
It is generally believed that property rights are for the rich. But no, property rights are more important for the poor. Recognition of their property rights is a must for the poor, because the rich have money, so they can do anything. But without property rights, the poor are living a miserable life.
First of all, I will say that manifesto should say that government will no longer be doing any business except in areas where they may not be an alternative right now, maybe atomic energy, couple of other things. So government will get out of business, because as is often said in our old logic and wisdom, जिस देश का राजा व्यापारी उसकी जनता भिखारी. So government has to get out of that. And second, the size of the government in some areas has to reduce, but in some areas it has to increase. For example, India has too few policemen, too few judges, too few diplomats, too few doctors, too few people and resources are going into areas where it is the government's job to provide services, facilities and goods to the people. So a truly liberal constitution will redefine all of that, plus it will say that Indian secularism, while it doesn't mean that that you should not follow your faith, the state shall never interfere in matters of the faith.
So let me suggest 2 things. If this political party were to ever form and to find enough votes to get it to office, we must rediscover the core of the roots of political liberalism, which is the idea that liberalism is against all forms of hierarchy and social power. That kind of commitment would build a social coalition that was ranged against feudal power, against religious power, against capitalistic concentrations of economic power, as well as against concentrations of political power in the state. It is only if we can imagine, go back to the core ideas of liberalism as a project against the concentration of power and against social hierarchies, that even such a political party coming to power is imaginable. If we were to see, oftentimes in middle class, upper middle class urban India, we understand liberalism too narrowly to just mean a project of individual freedom. And unless we imagine that more broadly, we don't even get off the ground. Now, if a party like this were to get to power, I would imagine that the most significant constitutional project it could undertake would be to empower the district courts of the country to adjudicate constitutional rights. It can do this under Article 32(3) of the Constitution just by legislation. But if we unleashed the district courts on the constitutional rights, we will see retail litigation in the districts of this country that will result in a radical political accountability of local governments and the far reaches of government. Today, by constraining constitutional rights protection to the high courts and to the Supreme Court, we have almost hedged in the Constitution. And I think the most radical thing to do would be to empower the district courts.
There are obviously many things: service delivery, rule of law, decentralization, delivery of education and healthcare, and electoral system change so that the incentives in politics are altered. But if God appears and says there's only one thing I can deliver, I can grant to you, which is the one thing that you want in order to make our democracy robust, our liberty real, and our lives better, I would unquestionably say, give us genuinely empowered local governments. We have seen 5 examples of how things dramatically improve in outcomes, even in our otherwise moribund and ineffective system. In all these, there is a common thread. The common thread is people, the stakeholders, understood what is at stake. They are not passive recipients of what we dish out.